So I'm a competency geek. This is my religion. This is what I do for a living. Okay. We're going to go through a bunch of stuff today, looking at why this matters, how this is actually applicable inside of your organizations, what you can do to focus on competency, how you can build a competency-based program inside your company, which impacts hiring, it impacts onboarding, it impacts ongoing operations, it impacts retention. It's, for me, I mean, it's the alpha and the omega. Everything revolves around the quality of the people. Okay? So there's methodology around this. So the first question, I guess, is what is this thing we call competency? First off, who's doing competency in your organizations now? Okay. Hands up, quick. Who's doing it? Some. Actually, actively hiring on the basis of competency, managing those competencies, growing those competencies. Who thinks they're doing it really well and effectively? Nobody. Okay, that's good. That's why we're here. So, you know, one of the problems with competency is that it's a relatively young field. And if you get 10 of us competency geeks together in a room, none of us think competency actually means the same thing, which doesn't make it any easier for you folks. But we're talking about applying specific skills in specific contexts for specific outcomes.
So you're talking common sense.
Sometimes.
Really have to find.
Sometimes it's not very common. Okay. Here's another question for you. Okay. How many people here hire duds? On purpose. On purpose. Right? Everybody here hires the best people, right? Hire good people, smart people, competent people. How many people's organization is set up so that competent people stay competent? It's not a trick question. Okay. How many people here have ever heard of something called a Dreyfus scale? Okay, a Dreyfus scale. Like Dreyfus, like, I don't know, there's an actor named Dreyfus, probably a bunch of I would know Richard. If you're younger, you probably know she was in Seinfeld. Her name was Louis Dreyfus, isn't it? Julia, something, whatever. I don't watch TV. So, a Dreyfus scale. Don't bother writing all this stuff down. These is all on those sticks, okay? Dreyfus, whether you've used one or not, everybody knows what it is. Okay, you probably just don't know it's called a Dreyfus scale. That's a geek word you can take home with you now, right? But it's basically those kind of idiot to expert, you know, where am I on this continuum from being a novice and not knowing anything to being an expert and forgetting more than you'll learn? Okay? So when you ask organizations about what kind of people they hire, they're always hiring up here. You know, at least competent, probably proficient, occasionally looking for experts, right? And then they hire them. And then they put them in boxes with procedures and rules and very, very rigid job descriptions. And they treat the organization, even though we've hired smart people, we now treat them as though they're all idiots. Right? We hire them because of what's from the neck up, and then we employ them from the neck down. Right? And it doesn't have to be that way. But we design our organizations and our management systems for the lowest common denominator. So we design as though everybody was a Timbit hockey player, but then we go out and try to hire people who are ready for the NHL. What does that do to engagement and morale and turnover and retention and everything else in the organization? Yeah. So Gallup in the US, they do more than find out who likes the president. They do a lot of operational research around employment trends and standards and everything else. And they do a thing every year. They call it the Q12 survey, and it's all about employee engagement. If you haven't found it, you can look it up online. The reports are all there. It's really, really interesting stuff. Maybe only because I'm a competency geek. But the thing that comes out of the Gallup study year after year after year after year after year is that something close to 70% of employees in the US are either disengaged or actively disengaged at work. And by actively disengaged, they mean like literally sabotaging the company that gives them a paycheck. And when you cross-reference that information against age and education, what do you think you find out? Anybody? Just take a guess. There's no. Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think? Just wild guess. What do you think? Who's most disengaged? On the basis of age and education. Actually, it's not. It's the kids with degrees. Why? Because they get hired because they have brains the size of small planets, and then we put them in a box and don't let them use it. These are smart people. It takes them a week to figure that out, and then it's cat videos and Facebook all day, right? You know this is going on, right? The most engaged people on that same survey are older people with less education who actually have to stretch every day. Okay? The whole thing is you want to set up your organization so that people get to work like dogs. Everybody's kind of looking at me like, why would I want to work like a dog? Anybody got a working dog? Anybody watched dogs work? Yeah, I have Labradors. I shouldn't hit that, should I? I'm going to deafen Scott at the back of the room. You have never. My lab. She's a lumpy carpet most of the time until it's time to work, and then you have never seen so much excitement, so much interest, so much engagement, because they're using all of their skills, doing work they were born to do, and the best reward is they get to come back and do it again tomorrow. Right? Go watch a dog work. We should be so lucky that we get to work like dogs. Right? That's the environment we want. Because it's a fun way of working. But it means changing the way you think about how you hire them, how you grow them, and how you improve the organization. There is so much latent skill wandering around in companies that no one will ever find out about because people are in a box that's defined by their job description, and you never figure out the rest of what they can do. Okay? In that kind of an environment, you're automatically going to have disengaged employees, and you're never going to be as productive or as innovative or generate as much value for your customers, whoever they are, as if you had a different kind of organization. So, why are you in business? If the reason, this is Peter Drucker, you can't see him. He's not actually, he's usually brighter than that. Peter Drucker, everybody know who Peter Drucker is? Everybody do management classes? Okay. If you've never done more geek stuff, okay. Peter Drucker, he died a few years ago, but he kind of invented management consulting. He had most of this stuff about management and leading organizations figured out 70 years ago. And everything we've done since then is just expanding on the base principles. But he said that the purpose of an organization or a business is to create and keep customers. That's it. It's to serve your customer, right? So if you believe that, and I do, then the prime directive for organizations is your purpose as a manager, your purpose as a leader in an organization is to continually find ways to allow your organization to generate value and increase the value that it generates for its customers. And the only way you can do that is with people. Agreed? Okay. If you don't agree, get out. And it's all about the people. And we know this, right? Everybody wants to be on a winning team. Everybody wants to be engaged at work. We all want the same kinds of things, right? And so you're going to represent this as three circles, okay? This is, if you're a manager and you don't have a job description or you have one that's 3 pages long, who falls into either of those categories? Okay? Simple, okay? Here's your job description as a leader, as a manager. Achieve the task, build and maintain the team, develop the individuals. That's it. Who achieves the tasks in the organization? Exactly. It's not the managers. They're overhead. Right? Hopefully they add some value, but the real value generation is at the lowest levels in the organization, which are the people who get the least amount of training, the least amount of support. They're the most expendable, right? And they're the ones that are dealing with your customers. Okay? McKinsey put out a thing, McKinsey, big consulting company. There's a book that was published back in March or April called Talent Wins. And they reckon in large organizations, there's actually only about 2% of the people that are driving the innovation, the strategy, and the value creation. And none of them are in the boardroom. And so if companies don't have effective strategies for recognizing, promoting, not that you should ignore the other 98%, but if you can't find those 2%ers, you're screwed in a competitive marketplace. And the market is changing so fast that you need people who can think on their feet. Okay? So this is now your job. And what we find is that if as a leader, if you focus on these bottom two pieces, I mean, conscientiously every single day, focus down here, this looks after itself. Because that's their job. Your job is to add value to the work that they do. You do that by focusing in the bottom. Okay? It's a pyramid. You don't have the foundation, the tasks, you wind up doing everybody's job for them, and that's no fun. Okay? And this isn't just me being all geeky and excited about this. There was a report that the Business Development Bank of Canada did a couple of years ago now, I think. Thousands of companies across Canada, primarily smaller organizations, that were identified as having or being high growth organizations. And the number 2 strategy that was driving success was build the talent pool. And the top one was about serving your customers. Go figure. And the reality is, these are the people that serve your customers, these are the people that drive the innovation, and these are the people that are the ones you need to invest in, right? Because there's no proprietary technology anymore. You know, ask the Chinese. That doesn't get you a competitive advantage. You can buy or steal all the technology there is, right? It's people that drive value, okay? Association for Talent Development, used to be ASTD, American Society for Training Development. They put out a study every year. They determined, I've been reading these for about 20 years now, those organizations with a higher percentage of payroll spend on employee development, competency development, outperform everybody else in their market space. This makes sense, right? The break line's about 2% of payroll. You're paying 2% or more, it's almost logarithmic, the change in terms of company performance. Most Canadian companies are south of 1% of payroll in employee development, ongoing development. So that's something to consider. There's a reason why Canada lags some of our competitors around the world in terms of productivity, and it's mostly about employee development spend. Okay, and if you look at some examples from specific industries, we've got folks here from construction, oil and gas, utilities. Just nod if you are, okay. And a lot of folks from the nonprofit sector, right? Okay. Here's the thing, okay. Canadian Apprenticeship Forum and Build Force Canada did some studies. The ROI on essential skills, these are the most basic of literacy skills for employees. Depending on where they were being employed and what the apprenticeship program was, anywhere from $3 to over $25 for every dollar invested in upgrading those skills in terms of the ROI. So if I could sell you a stock and guarantee you 2,500% return on your investment, would you buy it? Right? And this is with the crap way that we tend to do employee skills upgrading. It's really haphazard. It's not a programmed activity. It sort of happens by gosh and by golly in most organizations. So if you do it that way, you're down here around $3. But if you actually focus on it and do it right, it's a lot, right? I mean, the ROI is huge, okay? One of my clients, Wayward Steel, out of Edmonton, worked with them a few years ago. They had a series of almost fatal accidents and decided to throw away their safety programs because it clearly wasn't working, although they had won awards for their safety programs. And they started focusing on individual competency, doing things right. And this is steel fabrication and construction, right? It's easy to get hurt when you're moving 10 tons of steel around. And they still, that number's 5 million. It's getting closer to 6 now. Person hours without a lost time accident since focusing on doing things right. That's their safety program. It's also their productivity program and their quality program. Okay. Over $1.5 million in direct cost savings a year by not having to shut down work sites to do accident investigations. Not to mention the human cost of an accident. Okay? And if you're interested, let me know. I'll send you a copy of the report. It's fascinating reading. Canadian Natural, they got an office out here somewhere. People know Canadian Natural. Bolted Joint Integrity Management Program. Because in refineries and upgraders, when you don't bolt up joints and flanges with all that pipes and stuff, bad things happen. Things blow up, fires, explosions, it's nasty stuff. So they started doing a day-and-a-half program for all of their maintenance crews, both internal and the contractors coming in, to teach people who are supposed to know how to do this. I mean, they're all licensed tradespeople. The right way to bolt up a flange, right? You would think a pipe fitter would know how to bolt up a flange, but apparently there's a wide variation in the way pipe fitters bolt up flanges. Depends on who taught them, right? Since they put this in place, they've had north of 40,000 flanges without a leak. They've reduced their maintenance costs by 30%. They can now refine and process twice as much with the same maintenance staff. And that equates to literally millions of dollars in found money for the organization. And no one gets hurt because they're not getting, piles of hot bitumen spilled on them. Right? This is real money, okay? Real money. We're not talking cents here. We're talking real money. The ROI on investing in this stuff, on investing in competency, is huge. Okay? So the question then becomes, why doesn't anybody do it? Okay? Well, no, it's an investment. It makes money. Okay? Yeah. They don't know how or they don't want to. There's only 4 reasons why people don't do what they're supposed to do. Okay? They don't know they're supposed to do it. That's a management problem. We can fix that. They know they're supposed to do it, but they don't know how to do it. That's a training problem. We can fix that. They know how to do it, and they know they need to do it, but for whatever reason, because of the way the work is set up or whatever, they're unable to do it. That's a management problem. We can fix that. Or they don't want to do it. That's also a management problem, and we can fix that too. And has any of you guys been trainers? Stuck in corporate training? Okay. Training is where we always send the sweat hogs to be fixed, right? Training is where you send the problems, and you hope that by, through re-education, they'll suddenly become good workers, right? And the reality is that has to be dealt with at the front end by leaders, by managers, not by the training department. So everybody knows the acid test for determining if it's really a training problem. Okay, this is a military thing, so bear with it. Okay. In the military, we had a way of finding out if it was really a training problem. You'd hold a gun to their head and find out if they could do it now. And if their life depended on it and they can perform adequately, it's not a training problem, it's a motivational problem. There's a different solution for that. Okay? It's a rough business. Okay? I was in a really, really, really tough business. Okay? The reality is, if you want to grow your business, if you want to add value for your clients and continually add value for your clients, you need to grow your people. Even if you're in the nonprofit sector, you guys know it's harder and harder and harder to gather money, to get grants. You've got to show performance. That's not going to go away. Who knows what's going to happen when the government, or if the government changes in Alberta at least next year. It's already difficult. It's going to get harder, I think, because there's not a lot of money to go around. And if you can't demonstrate performance, if you can't demonstrate value, you're out of luck, right? And the secret is people. Always. Okay? So, why don't people do it? Don't want to, can't afford it, don't know how, right? Yeah. It's funny, I was in a meeting the other week, and I asked a bunch of managers, and they were all sitting around complaining about their workers, which is what managers do when the workers aren't around. Yeah, it is. It's why they have a staff room in schools, right? That's so the teachers can go and whine about the students without the students being there. Okay, and I asked them. I said, "What if there was a guaranteed way to improve your workforce? Guaranteed money or your money back?" And almost half of them weren't interested in trying it. And I suppose it's the same reason why people stay in a job they hate or an abusive relationship or anything else. Because change is hard. Doing things differently is hard. And you'd rather deal with the horrible situation that you have and know than the unknown future that might be better. Right? More management theory for anybody who's never done management. You can get like an MBA in an afternoon here, okay? So Theory X and Theory Y. Douglas McGregor was a professor at MIT. This is part of a rather thick book, but basically Theory X says they're all idiots, they're all slugs. The only reason they're going to work is because they're afraid of what will happen to them if they don't, right? And I got to kick them to be productive, and they're only here for the paycheck. Anybody work for an organization like that? Okay. Theory Y, which is the other end of the continuum, says that people want to do good work. They want to be independent. They want responsibility. And they're motivated by the value of the work that they do. And money is a secondary issue. And people drive themselves to perform, and they self-motivate. Anybody work in that kind of an organization? Okay. The reality is that most organizations kind of move back and forth between both ends of this continuum on a pretty regular basis. Okay. But there are so many managers and organizations that still lean towards that Theory X end of the scale. Okay. Right? This is your classic Theory X manager, right? Okay. So if you apply Theory Y type approaches and you start focusing on growth and competency and growing people and giving them a pathway to succeed, the difference is like this. Anybody old enough to remember hockey like this? Yeah, we all played it when we were kids, right? Right? They all move in one direction. They can only do some things. It's very limited. And the only way they move at all is if the guy at the end of the table moves them. Right? That's a very top-down organization. It's not really effective, and it's not actually hockey. Or you can have this, which is fluid, and it's constantly moving, and it's fast. And who's in charge is whoever's got the puck. And the only person who knows for sure where they're going to be for 60 minutes is the goaltender, because everybody else is all over the place. This is beautiful. It's fast, it's effective, it's fun. But most organizations still run this way. Okay? And even if I've convinced you and you all go home and say, well, starting tomorrow, we're going to do this, you can't. Because you have to train people to operate this way. You've got to grow them into that world. And even if they came into your organization thinking this way and being able to do this thing, if you put them in an organizational structure that's a lowest common denominator environment, it doesn't take them very long to either leave or conform. And this is a muscle, and it atrophies. And you can't just say, okay, from now on, we operate this way, right? Because it would be like taking a Pee Wee team and throwing them on the ice in an NHL game. It'd be entertaining, but it wouldn't be very effective because they just don't know how. So it's a top-down leadership approach to changing the way we think about organizations and the way we hire, the way we train, the way we grow people. Okay? The obvious corollary to all this is the money that you can make or the value that you can generate if your organization thinks this way and acts this way. Okay? More Drucker. Okay? Knowledge, skill, whatever you have in your organization, it's precious. But if you don't work that muscle, it disappears. Right? We've got data right now that suggests that people will graduate from high school or college with a certain IQ level, go into jobs, and 10 years later, their IQ level will drop. Yeah, I thought it was the drinking. Apparently, no, it's a muscle. Use it or lose it. So if you're in a job that doesn't constantly challenge you to grow, you're actually getting dumber every day at work. I mean, we seriously, there's a study coming out next month from the Canada West Foundation that actually has hard global data on this. And we also can tie now a 1-point increase in essential skill levels with I think it's a 7% increase in productivity globally. So if you make your workforce smarter, force your workforce to be smarter, your productivity will go up 7 times the increase in the IQ level. Right? That's big stuff. And it's not actually that hard to do. Okay? Questions about that? Are you convinced? You want to know how to do it? Okay. Good. Is this going to roll, or am I going to have to change slides again now? Yeah, it's going to roll. Give me my next one. So, yeah, and the key to this, and we're going to talk about it, is understanding competency, understanding skill sets. Ada talked about it this morning about having those criteria, understanding what you're actually hiring for, okay, and how critical that is for the hiring decisions, but also ongoing. Most companies, how many organizations, how many works for somebody that they actually have a talent management system in place in their company? No. How many people even know what a talent management system is? Okay. See, that's scary.
We're in the midst of implementing the talent management system, but we're not there yet.
Okay. How big is the organization?
So 600.
Okay. Cool. This will be interesting. Okay. Yeah. So most companies, most organizations, and it's not just because they're small, don't have any effective way of doing this. If you're really, really, really big, there's always, plugins to SAP and your enterprise resource management, HR software, and things like that kind of do it, but they don't do it very well. And most companies don't have any automated tools for doing this. And the reason is most companies don't know they should, right? So what exactly are we talking about in terms of this competency and critical skills? You guys all do job descriptions? How long are your job descriptions? Okay. How useful is that to you in your everyday work? Okay, how many people actually are their job description? Right? Again, right? We put people in a box. How many people only do what's in their job description? Right? If you've got a detailed one and it gives you measurable activities and measurable performance targets and all that other stuff, that's great. You're rare, I would suggest. Most organizations don't go anywhere near that. And we've seen job postings, job descriptions from companies that you would expect to be a lot more sophisticated, that I would look at that. If I was advertising for that, I wouldn't even know if I was qualified for the job. Right? So what goes into a job posting, which is a half marketing and half competency or hiring criteria, and then what goes into the individual's job description and position description afterwards. These are important pieces. We mentioned earlier today about, how do you decide on internal candidates when, and get the emotions out of it. When you focus on this stuff and you can actually quantify competencies and critical skill sets, all of a sudden the right person becomes easier to identify, and you can have that conversation so that when you when you tell someone they didn't get the job, you can show them exactly why. And the next word out of your mouth should be, and here's the plan that we're going to put in place to get you ready when that job opens next time, so that next time you will fill these competencies. So a rejection becomes a positive, and it leads to employee development, okay? Which is your primary role as a leader, is developing the people underneath you, okay? So, this is because it usually breaks up. Okay, but this should have been at the beginning. It's too late. I don't care what you're here to take away. Okay, 60% of companies, small organizations, can't find the right skills, and they consider that to be their biggest challenge, is finding the right skill sets. Okay, Robert Half, they're a recruiting company. And SMEs, small organizations, have fewer resources to spend to find the right talent. Agree with me? Okay. The cost per hire, Ada mentioned a number this morning, which is a newer number than the ones I have in my presentation. But it's interesting, was what $4,100 or something like that in the States, what they were saying. Okay. And we know that just because of scale, it's the smaller your organization is, the more it actually costs per hire. Okay, so these were numbers from 2012. Okay, in the U.S., large corporations are just a little more than half the cost per hire. These numbers have gone up. And I don't know if they take into account the same variables that are in the 4,100 that SHRM did. But even if these numbers are the same, if you're in a small organization and you hire 10 people per year, that's 36 grand. Who's got 36 grand to hire the wrong people? You could hire another person for that in some jobs, right? So you cannot afford to do this wrong. Okay? So if we do this, and I'll show you some ideas around competencies, and we'll get to that, but about clarifying exactly as minutely as possible what you're looking for, so you can attract the right people who have the kind of competencies that you need, and then have a tool that will allow you to select those people and develop the proper teams. Someone asked about, how do you, with reference checks? Who was that? Who was asking about reference checks? Yeah, okay. I'm going to jump forward. I'm jumping way forward. Okay. I'm going to start with this. Okay. There's an outfit down in Albuquerque. Took a no resume hiring fair. They hired with a bunch of companies down there got 300 at-risk youth hired without ever anybody seeing a resume. And they got hired into kind of entry-level to mid-skill jobs. And they made their selections on the playground by tossing a basketball and finding out how they interacted with each other. And they found out who the leaders were and who the followers were and who wanted to be part of a team and who didn't. And they made their hiring decisions that way. Okay? Because even though it's like Survivor, right? Even though you know the cameras are on you, in about 10 minutes, you start acting like you really are, not the way you think you're supposed to act. Okay? Next Jump Corp in New Jersey do this thing called Super Saturdays. They bring in all of the job candidates for orientation sessions. And they used to hire exactly the way that all the tech companies hire. Right? They'd go to the best schools and try and get the best people. Of course, they didn't have the money to outcompete the Facebooks and the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons. But they did their best on the basis of credential-based hiring. You know, the people that with the best degrees or whatever. And they found out that what they had done in their engineering and development staff is they had hired a wonderful group of very, very, very talented jackasses who couldn't work together, right? I mean, they're computer people, right? But you don't develop software now in a closet in your basement. You have to work in multifunctional, multidisciplinary teams. So they fired about half of their staff, and now they do these things called Super Saturdays. So they bring them in and they put them through orientation, and there's Q&A sessions, and there's little workshop games, problem-solving things that they make them do. And they're constantly under observation from the rest of the staff. And they're constantly being scored on behavioral attributes that are going to make them the right part of this team. Because the presumption is, if you learned how to code, it doesn't really matter where you learned how to code. You know how to code, right? Can you work here? And all that information is going back to the war room, where they're keeping a running score on these people who are acting. You know, how do they react? What kind of questions do they ask? How do they react when other people ask questions, right? Especially if it's a really stupid question, right? Because they want to see. And then at the end of the day, it's literally swipe left, swipe right on who's in and who's out. And those decisions are made by the people they're going to have to work with as part of their teams, not by management. Because they want the right people. They are now they do e-commerce software. They're one of the top in their niche in the country. And since it's software, I suppose that means on the planet, right? And they've completely revolutionized the way they hire. Penguin Random House doesn't now require any degrees in entry-level positions anywhere in the company anymore. Google won't look at your degree either. They hire from Code Wars and hackathons, right? Hack into our computer and get a job, right? Ernst & Young and Deloitte, in my world, in the advisory services, won't let hiring managers know where you went to school. And they're not allowed to ask questions about that anymore. The presumption being is if you get past the HR screening, you have the technical skill sets. Now it's about fit. It's about those competency basis of hiring. Google, as I said, they won't even look at a resume. And this, they said specifically that resumes are useless and formal credentials are almost meaningless now. Okay? So now I'll go back to where I was supposed to be. Okay? So we look at these things about critical skills, right? All of this, it relates to all of this. It goes all around. It's part of your hiring, your workforce planning. It factors into performance management. It factors into development. You name it. It's all part and parcel, and it all focuses around competencies and critical skills. So these are things that you learn and then strengthen over time through investment. Okay? We've all got them. Many of them have nothing to do with our technical skill sets and what we do on the job. And the higher you go in the organization, the less important your technical skills are, right? Because the job of management is to add value to the people underneath, not do their job for them, right? So it's important. So we're looking at the way that these things are applied. It's not just what, but it's also the how, it's the context. So your hiring practices need to focus on example-based stuff to understand, have they done it? They may have the skill, but have they applied it in the right context to get the value that I need in this organization, okay? And these change over time. The example is, you know, like if this was 100 and something years ago, we'd be looking for a different set of skills in our society than we're looking for now, right? Survival skills for the future are what? Anybody got an idea? Future work, you always hear about it, right? What are the critical transferable skill sets for the future? Yeah, that's always been critical, but it's even more critical now, right? Technology skills, okay? Leadership, well, what is leadership? Yeah, leadership is about 90% communication and about 10% doing what you say you're going to do. Yeah. Okay. So those things that are going to make us successful as organization in the future are not the same things that make us successful now, and certainly not the things that were making us successful in the past. Okay. The critical skill sets for the future, because the robots are coming, right? Okay. These kinds of things. And the reality is, even in jobs that used to be very focused, very hands-on, very procedures-based, those kinds of jobs are disappearing at a rapid rate. And even in the lowest levels in most organizations, there's a lot more problem-solving, critical thinking, interdependency, working with other people, perseverance, which I guess they call that grit. I thought grit was what anyway, doesn't matter. But this idea, these are the things that make us human. Because if your strategy for the future is be smarter than the machines, or faster than the machines, or stronger than the machines, you've already lost. Okay? We can't win that fight. As organizations, to add value, we have to focus on the human skills that allow us to gather value from those machines. Okay? So it starts with things like this. The question is, how do you evaluate that?
Create scenarios or something for, if you're trying to hire somebody that has good problem-solving skills, then give them a problem to solve.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. These are difficult to test for, right? That's why we have orientation programs. That's why we have 3 months probation. So you can put them into seriously. And so you can put them in scenarios, put them in situations, and find out if they have this. Test as much of it as you can beforehand. Test for fit and culture and all that other stuff. Obviously, if you have specific technical skill requirements, test for those, okay? But if you look down your org chart and find the best people, chances are it's not because of their technical skills. It's because of these skills. In fact, the best people in your org chart are the ones that find a way around your org chart, right? More Drucker, right? Management consists of all of those things that we put in place to prevent people from doing their job. That's what management is. That's what management systems are. So the best people always are people who have these informal networks inside of the organization, and they can always sort of get around the management. right? We've all worked there. No one's listening, right? It's the Radar O'Reillys of the world. It's the people who know how to get stuff done, regardless of the management system. And that's a function of these skills, right? Who does behavioral interviewing? Behavioral stuff where you ask situational questions and see what the responses are. How effective is it? I'm just curious. How effective do you find it? Yeah. The minute you come up with a cool question for behavioral interviewing, it's posted on the internet, and about 30 seconds later, everybody knows what the answer is, right? So you can game the system. I was talking to a guy in Washington a few months ago, runs a big software company. And he said, who's the people that normally get hired? Well, they're the people with the interesting background and experience and that interview well. And so the problem is they've got, so they've worked at Microsoft and they've worked at Google and they've worked here, and now we can get them. Well, there's a reason why they don't work at Google anymore. And it wasn't because Google wasn't challenging them, right? So the people that interview well are people that interview a lot. They get a lot of practice at it. But it's true, right? It's a learned skill. And so many of the ways that we try and be creative about screening for this stuff, we wind up screening out people who would be excellent. And they'll never get past the applicant tracking system and the robots who screen the resumes. But then they'll never get past the interview because they don't know how to play the game properly. Right? We've all been there, right? Most consultants are consultants because we can't get a real job or can't hold a real job. Right? A month after a downturn, everybody's a consultant. I've been a consultant through a bunch of downturns, but it's the reality, right? I wouldn't know how to do a job interview anymore. It's been so long since I think the last time I did a job interview was in 1995. Right? And if you were to try and hire me based on my degree, I got that in 1986. Right? We didn't have desktop computers back then. Right? And so, but we still, as hiring managers, right, we look for the credential. We look for that stuff. And that's like going to your doctor and the doctor says, "How's your health?" And you said, "I ran a marathon in 1992. And it's like, so what? What have you done lately, right? Credentials, the half-life of education credentials, not that they're bad, but the half-life of value in terms of direct skill and direct applicability in the marketplace is smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Experience helps. The best employees we find are ones that are referred by existing employees.
Most people won't put their neck out.
Well, they don't want to work with an idiot. And they're a good judge of who fits. Next Jump is a perfect example. It's the employees who hire, who make the hiring decisions. Okay, so blah, 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 blah. Okay, so investment in knowledge and skills over time is what creates the strengths that allow your organization to grow. So we talk about core competencies for your organization. You guys all have value statements, right? How are the values of your organization reflected in the critical skill sets that you hire for? Good to think about because there's an exercise coming up where you'll actually have to do this. How many people even know what the value statement of their company or organization is? You'd have to look it up. Most people would. We actually found if you talk to the boards of directors of companies and ask that question about what their vision and value statement is, and you have 12 people on a board of directors, you get 12 different answers. They don't even know. Okay. But the core competencies support the values of the organization. So if you're an organization that actually believes in teamwork, there's a way to define what that means, what that looks like in the field, right? And from statements like this, again, resumes are worth the paper they're printed on, but you can find examples and you can ask in interviews about specific stuff that shows this sort of behavior, because past behavior is an indication of future behavior. Okay? It's imprecise, right? Resumes on a scale of 0 to 1, 0 being completely useless, 1 being absolutely perfect, are about a 0.1. Right? It's, yeah, and again, depending on the size of the organization, it's how you can game the robot to get your resume through the first screen anyway. Right? Which is why informal referrals from existing employees are better than resumes. And that'll find you people that may not actually ever get through the screen. Okay. So you start with those core competencies, the things that are really, really matter around here. And then you move on to the technical, the job-specific stuff, some of which may be across the company. Some of it may be very, very specific to a role or a position, okay? And these are generally more measurable. You can test for technical skills, right? There are ways to find out if somebody knows how to use, I don't know, Excel spreadsheets or whatever's important to you, okay? And then your competency statements here are not only just about that they can do it, but also how things get done. So when you're looking at a job-specific technical competency, which may be, I don't know, customer service, right? You have to deal forward-facing, dealing with clients. There's a process. There's a checklist that you use if you're on the returns desk at Walmart, right? It's very, very specific. And there's some people that are really good at it, and there's some people that suck at it. But you can get a computer to follow the checklist. What makes someone good at customer service is the way they follow the checklist and the way they interact. So the how is the application of the core value competencies in the delivery of the technical work. Okay? It's a lot harder than it looks. Okay? Which is why we have 3-month probation periods. Seriously, right? I mean, that's where you test drive the individual and the individual test drives the company. And at the end of 3 months, there should never be any question about whether they're staying or going, right? So when you look at technical stuff, look at not only, yes, can drive the truck, but what other behavioral indicators are that they're doing it the way that fits with the values. I'm going to wait for another hour. We don't need slides, okay? So this was from a engineering company, okay? So it's decidedly mealy-mouthed, right? But you're actually looking for, this is business analyst in a tech company, but you need people that are going to do more than just follow the checklist, right? You're looking for a level of proficiency and the ability to think and move further along. So they've got their functional and technical stuff, but also, initiative around that, how they do things. Okay, I don't have to need my real world examples because I've already used them. So when you break this all down, you're starting with vision and values and then going to the core behavioral attributes and underlying competencies that everybody in the company needs to have in order to make those visions real. Okay. And then you link that top to bottom through the organization, and there's clear pathways. There's never a problem around the annual performance review if it's all competency based, because it's clear right from the beginning. Okay. In fact, the whole rigmarole of the annual performance review in many cases can just disappear in this kind of an environment, because those conversations that happen between supervisors and their direct reports are an ongoing thing that never allows people to not know where they stand. As I said, if you follow this process, if you provide this and tie it to specific objectives and growth over time, you're getting that feedback regularly. People understand the options around career progression. The organization can start understanding the total person's competencies, which is not just the box that they're living in now, right? It's latent skill. How many people have been in a job where they could do other things, but they're not allowed to because it's not part of their job? How many of your managers even know that you can do that other stuff? Yeah. If you're lucky, they do, right? As I said, back to my example at the beginning, and the reason we were able to do with 12 people what the Marine Corps couldn't do with 75 was because we knew the total skill sets. And so we could create really interesting work for people and let them use all of their skills and apply them in really cool and interesting ways, which allowed us to do things that we shouldn't have been able to do. Westinghouse, who built our radar, said it took a 12-man crew 24 hours to get it out of the box and put it online in ideal conditions. I did it on the top of a mountain in 120-degree heat with 3 guys in 6 hours. And all I did was say, go do it. Because of taking advantage of the whole skill set that people have and not putting them in boxes. So it's really, really critical. If you take advantage of latent skill, your organization can probably generate twice as much value as it's currently doing. It can be exponentially more productive than it is now. It can be innovative without actually having an innovation program. It just happens. It's really kind of cool. It's an organic thing when you let people use their whole skill. Okay? So, when you're doing your job descriptions, the what isn't enough. It's the how. And the how isn't just specific techniques. It's the underlying values and behaviors that are driving performance for the organization. Okay? The competencies that you're hiring for need to be based on this, and you have to start with, why are we here? How do we drive value for our customer, whoever your customer is? And everybody from the CEO to the person that empties the garbage cans should understand how they're adding value and how the way they behave adds value for the customer. And if they can't explain it, they don't belong there. And if there's no way to quantify the value that's being added, that position doesn't belong there. You don't need to hire for that position, right? if you've got a competency basis and it's tied to this, you now have the building blocks for a really, really effective employee development program. Because you can trace pathways from wherever you are in the organization to anywhere else in the organization based on demonstrated ability to do specific things, specific ways for specific outcomes. So there's a pathway. Okay. Questions on that? Because then we're going to take a 10-minute break, go into the last thing, and then we've got an exercise because you're actually going to do this. All right, ready to roll? About 30 minutes, then we'll have about another 20, 30 minutes to go through a little exercise, and then we'll review that, and then everybody can disappear. So, how? The important bit, right? The good stuff. We've told you about the what, we've told you about the why. Now it's, okay, great. You're all back, so I'm assuming you care. And so we're going to talk about how. Currently, in your organizations, this is the interactive part of the demonstration. What are you guys doing now internally in your organizations to grow people? Anybody?
Goal setting.
Go ahead. We're doing goal setting, and we also offer a lot of in-service training for our staff, and some management training is coming up. So,
Okay. How programmed is that? Like,
explain. What do you mean?
is it off the shelf or is it individualized?
The goal setting is individual. The training is
Not.
is not.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Heave it on back there.
Arms aren't long enough. We have just implemented in the last couple of years we call it a SMART plan. So it's for the employees to have coaching sessions with their leaders, and it's all about what the employees want to be able to develop themselves to grow within the organization.
Okay. How often do those sessions happen?
Once a month at minimum, sometimes more.
Okay. And
And
the organization is diligent about doing that?
Sorry?
The organization is really diligent about
Oh, yeah.
keeping that schedule? What happens to the managers when they don't?
It's the employees have to keep them accountable.
Okay.
And it's very much brought up quite often. Be sure to keep them accountable. But yeah.
Okay. So here's a question then. How much training in those coaching and development activities do your managers get? Or are they just expected to know that?
And with, between sorry,
Coaching and developing and creating those development plans with employees, how much training do your managers get in those processes?
they get trained. We had training sessions in regards to the SMART plan. We also have access to any type of training that they would want to do through university, through
Okay.
programs we bring in.
So you guys are progressive.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Her husband works there.
He's
Yeah.
one of the coaches.
Yeah.
And he's been one of the people that have had
Cool.
big training. They're very, 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 very.
What sector?
Finance.
Okay.
They're,
Yeah, they got lots of money in finance.
We're a credit union, so.
They make money. Okay, anybody else? Internal development? Go ahead, pass the cube.
We encourage internals to apply on other jobs that they're interested in to grow their knowledge in the company as a whole. If they wanted to be a manager one day of an entire department, if they want to move around in the jobs, we encourage them.
Okay. Are the criteria of all those positions available openly that people can understand where they fit?
Yes.
Cool. That's good. Next.
What we do is we do encourage our people that have expressed interest in, say, moving into a team lead management role. We may try to actually put them into a position like say a temporary role, to see, to give them the opportunity to try it. We just had an example is we had a short-term medical leave that was a leadership position. And there was an employee that had expressed interest in becoming a leader. And so we give it a shot. And it's great because now the other person has come back, but now we've grown another person to possibly take the next leadership role that comes along because it worked out that she was interested. She showed some stuff that we didn't know she had, right? Because she got the opportunity. So.
That's cool. You guys do internal mentoring?
Yes.
You have formal programs around mentoring? Okay. See, coaching and mentoring is one of those things that everybody says they do. Some companies do it really, really well. Some don't. But when it's done properly, it doesn't cost anything. You know, same with on-the-job training. If it's done right, it actually increases productivity, improves quality, it does all those things, and it doesn't actually cost anything to train that way. We'll talk about that as well. Okay. Next question, and it relates to what I said right at the very beginning in relation to our Dreyfus scale. When you bring someone in, or you've got an employee, is the confidence or competency development work or the learning and training that you do internally with your organization, is it task and compliance based or something else? So do you teach procedures and policies, or do you teach those underlying human skills that will make them more effective in the organization? Or both? I mean, there's room for both.
Yeah. There has to be.
Okay.
In most jobs, you have to have that rules and competencies.
See, in a really, really mature organization, the first rule is deciding whether or not you're going to follow the rule.
True.
It is, right? I mean, the checklist, the first line on the checklist should be, in a really competent organization, is, am I going to follow the checklist? And what's my conscious decision around that? And that's a measure of competency and the maturity of the organization around that kind of stuff. But again, you just can't invent that out of thin air. You have to grow that capability where people will even question things. Right? So who's doing this not compliance-based stuff internally? Well, give me an example of how you grow that ability to be innovative, to work in teams, to solve problems, to think critically, to ask the right kinds of questions. How do you do that? How do you train that? Anybody? It's not I mean, there's no right answer. I'm just curious. How you,
Modeling.
I mean, like we do training moments, we do lots of training moments. Like with quiz, you have group sessions for Zoom things where we'll all set up a couple groups
Okay.
and let them use their own imagination and then come back and talk about it and what we do differently and this and that. So it's,
okay.
there's a multi-million different things. I just can't figure out.
Yeah. Most of it isn't training
No.
in the classic sense, right? You don't put people in a classroom
No.
to teach them how to work together, right? Chris mentioned modeling, so it's the behaviors that you as a leader demonstrate are the behaviors that get repeated. Okay. In the military, we did a lot of exercises, particularly when I was in the military, because we were in the halt or we'll say halt again era, when we weren't actually involved in much in the way of real world operations. That changed about 1991, 92. But we did a lot of practicing. We did a lot of exercises. We did a lot of what ifs. And regularly they would throw a what if at a unit and just see what they'd do with it, how they would react. There's not a lot of opportunity to do that sort of thing in most organizations, but the lessons learned from your successes as well as your failures and those kinds of debriefing sessions to learn from each other, to say, why did we do it that way? What was my thought process? What could we have done differently? And we don't see a lot of organizations that actually take that time for that critical activity at the end of a day, at the end of a week, at the end of a emergency, to learn from it and grow those thinking skills internally with the organization. And when you look for these things, you mentioned, there's teaching moments. Everything you do is potentially a teaching moment and a training moment. And everybody from the top to the bottom can do and take part in this stuff, and the whole organization learns together. Is no one from the training world here? Okay, good. This is a secret from the training world, okay? There's $170 billion a year gets spent on workplace training. It's a big business. And about 70% or more doesn't actually change on-the-job behavior. This is, but it's not designed or supported in a way that changes behavior and actually changes performance. So most companies would be just as well taking their training budget, throwing it on a bonfire and having a weenie roast with it, as opposed to trying to do training. And they might generate more performance because people would be happy because they had a weenie roast. Right? And this is related to how you organize yourself around the training. Training is not an event, it's a lifestyle, right? So the data says that the things that managers and leaders do before someone goes into training represent about 25% of the effect. So it's the preparation before you go into the training, if it's a specific training program. The actual whatever you did in that training event is about another 25%. And then most of it is what you do after you get back to work. Now, how many people have gone to a training thing, come back to work, and then never actually applied what they supposedly just spent days learning? Anybody? Right? Guess what? You're typical. Yet that represents the majority of the effectiveness of the training, is the on-the-ground support, mentoring, coaching, and active application after you've learned a new skill. Okay? Organizations spend about 10% getting people ready to go and learn something, 85% on learning something, and nothing on the post-learning support. So that's why 70% of our money on training gets wasted, because we're not conscientious about the application and the behavioral change that we're trying to drive. Just for fun. That just repeats what was on that last slide. So the question is, where do you start? And because I'm military, I like things that are simple. And we like things in threes because we can't count very high. So identify, quantify, rectify. And the first step is that identification of those critical core competencies that are related to the values of the organization, and those critical behaviors and competencies, which is the application in a particular context for particular outcomes that you need on the technical side. Okay? Identify what they are. Identify them by position and throughout the organization. That's a lot of work. It's one of the reasons why no one does it. But it's critical. Okay? Doing this helps you understand why your best performers are your best performers. What is it that makes them the best? And as I said earlier, it's probably not their technical skills. It's probably a collection of some of these other behaviors that make them really, really effective in their role, whether they're, wherever they live in that organization. So it's important to quantify, like identify these things, and then really, really, really quantify it. And then you rectify it. And the best way, once you've identified what the skills are, once you've quantified in terms of how good people need to be in particular skill sets, and you've identified who your top performers are, now we can learn, and we can learn from each other. Okay? Apprenticeship is not that thing that the government runs. Apprenticeship is the way that humans have always learned. Right? It's learning by doing under the guidance of somebody who knows how to do it. That's how you learn. It's the best way to learn for humans most of the time. And it's cheap. Doesn't cost anything. Really doesn't. You do it right, actually it drives, whether it's technical skills, whether it's procedural stuff, whether it's these behavioral things, it drives increased performance. Who's been in a apprenticeship type, mentorship type environment for any length of time? Anybody? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. If you've been the mentor in that environment, what happens to your own job skills? They increase. So by teaching it to somebody else and helping somebody else grow, you get better at it. It's really funny, right? So your performance will increase even while you're working with someone with less skill. And so the overall productivity dump that everybody expects from apprenticeship never happens. Productivity goes up. Quality goes up. Safety goes up. All the measurable things in a job environment increase when you have active mentoring going on. And that's part of identifying and nurturing those critical competencies throughout the organization. So we look at it in terms of, people wearing coveralls and bending wrenches, but it's top to bottom. It's everywhere, right? And if the skill set that's necessary is something that the millwright has and the CEO needs to learn it, guess what? Mentoring can go many to many. It's not just top to bottom. It can go from anywhere in the organization to anywhere else in the organization. And now your mentoring relationships can be many to many instead of one to many or one to one. Okay? And if you're really progressive, you can open up this whole mentoring thing outside of your company because the kids are already doing it, right? They want to figure out how to do something and they don't know and they're not sure they can find out internally. They're sending a text message to their buddy or they're asking Dr. Google and they're figuring it out anyway, right? And then once they know, depending on your organization, if you're in the kind of organization that treats knowledge and skill as something that's rare and must be protected and that your knowledge is your power, they'll never let anybody know where they figured that out or, because now that gives them a power base in the organization. But if you have an organization that's open about constantly sharing skill, now everybody gets to be smarter. Now everybody gets to do better. Now the whole organization gets to thrive and prosper, and everybody gets paid next week, which makes all kinds of sense to me, right? So that approach, that process, if you do this right in terms of identifying the skill sets, identifying where people are in relation to those skill sets in measurable terms, understanding what the gaps are from where they are to where they need to be, and then putting in place ongoing mentorship from people who are good at this with people who aren't so good at it, your whole organization turns into a classroom. Your whole organization turns into a laboratory for advancing skill. And what's going to make companies successful in the future is this ability to learn and relearn and adapt. So unless you create that culture of constantly growing it inside using whatever internal gurus you happen to have in whatever the skill set happens to be, wherever they happen to be in the organization, you're going to fall behind. It is inevitable. And the learning curve is advancing for organizations. So these are, in terms of internal mentoring program. Everybody knows Rosie. Rosie the Riveter. We all have heard of Rosie the Riveter. The way they did this back in the 40s, where they took a completely untrained, non-traditional workforce and literally overnight turned them into productive workers. And it wasn't just in manufacturing. This was applied top to bottom throughout the entire economy. Okay? We're actually learning this again now because they brought that overseas into Japan after the war. And this is at the foundation of the Toyota production system and lean manufacturing, which we are now learning from the Japanese, having taught it to them in the 50s. Okay? But this approach, which works, which is all about individual mentoring and growing people, will drop time to competence by at least 50% while improving safety without any loss in quality and improving productivity. Because in the war, right, you couldn't have a safety problem. Hurt workers and dead workers aren't really productive workers. They couldn't afford a quality issue because they need that plane to work, right? And they needed it last week, not next week. So productivity, you couldn't take a hit. There are ways of doing this with structured learning and continuous on-job learning that'll make it so that this is, it's literally logarithmic acceleration in learning inside the organization. And it turns into a habit so that the organization continues to learn and grow that way. Okay? So one of the, I'm off topic, bear with me. They had 4 programs that they set up that they taught inside of organizations. Job instruction, which is how to teach people how to do things. Job method, which is how to teach people as a team to do things better. It sounds a lot like quality circles and lean manufacturing. And they had a supervisory course for problem solving, and it was called Job Relations, and it was basically how to get people to work well, work better, and to do that without pissing them off and having them all quit. So it's and it was an employee relations program that looks an awful lot like Theory Y management. And it's very structured. And they had another one that was focused on behavior-based safety, which apparently is a new thing. Except it's not, because they were doing it. In fact, the Canadians invented that in during the Second World War, specifically to solve safety problems in manufacturing plants. And then we forgot about it after the war. So the ROI on the proper approach of creating that learning organization, it's clear. And it works, as I said, whether we're talking manual skills, whether we're talking, the learning organization or the thinking organization of the future, which is a tech-driven organization, it's just easier now because you can track it better. Why we're not doing this, I have no idea. No one wants to, it's too hard. Anyway, so once you've identified the critical skill sets, once you've started mapping how those skill sets can be developed internally within your organization on a team-by-team basis, okay, then you follow its, industrial performance or project management 101. It's plan, do, check, act cycle, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Did we do it? Do we need to change it? Create a new plan. And it's this continuous virtuous circle of improvement, which requires management time, which means managers have to get out of the weeds, stop doing their workers' job for them, and start worrying about the development of those people so that they can deliver the value for the customers, which is what managers are for. Okay. This cycle continues forever. There is no end game. There's no such thing as perfect. So there's always improvement. There's always change. There's continuous development. But what we know is workers who are in that kind of, I'll go back. Workers who have never been in that kind of environment, who get thrown into that kind of environment, panic and freak out. But workers who are brought up in this kind of environment or get used to this kind of environment thrive in it. And they come to work every single day trying to figure out how to do things better, how to learn. And the whole organization learns on the go. It's beautiful to watch when it happens. Now, I've seen it because my brother works for Toyota, and they sort of invented this whole approach to employee development. They didn't, they copied it, but whatever. And it's incredible, right? Fujitsu, the copier people, they have a suggestion box, right? And in North America, we feel really good when we're getting, 50 or 100 useful suggestions in an employee suggestion box. They get 27,000 suggestions every year. And they reward every single one of them. And they act on most of them. Because a lot of them are just tiny little suggestions. Because the people come to work every day and go, how do I make my life easier? How could I do this and have it take less time or less effort or less this or less that? And it's incredible. And that's typical of some of the Japanese companies. And we think it's impossible.
You can't take a suggestion and then not act on it or at least respond.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem, I think, happens is employers may ask for those things,
Yeah, but they're not serious about it.
but they're not, but then exactly.
Yeah.
They don't
Don't ask
follow
my
through.
opinion unless you
So
really
then
want.
people say, well, why would I bother? Right?
Exactly.
That's what happens.
Exactly. So you have management, again, it always comes back to leadership. If you create this virtuous circle and you actually act on this stuff and try it out and experiment with it and grow with it, good things happen. But most organizations will consider your idea very carefully before rejecting it. And I'm serious about that, is that they have no intention of taking your idea.
No.
Because we're still in a Theory X world.
Yeah.
And the only good ideas come from the top. And that's stupid. I mean, again, we hire people because they have brains.
That's right.
Might as well use them. Anyway, So the outcomes of this, for whatever I've got, I keep meaning to get rid of that, and it never gets rid of. So if you create this environment for your organization, okay, it's win-win-win. Employers will wind up with a workforce that is growing and learning on the fly. It's morphing. You have your org chart becomes meaningless because you reorganize yourself almost dynamically around whatever today's problems are in a really fluid, multidisciplinary way. You have more people than you thought you had because you're using all of them instead of only half of them in terms of what they're capable of in their brain set. So you have a larger pool of skills and whole person engagement. That results in innovation, value generation, and happier customers. And that results in higher profitability and performance for the organization. Whether you're in a profit world or not, it's an improved bottom line. It's higher value. And it's exactly the same on the other side. People like working in that kind of an environment. They come to work and there's that non-discretionary, it's discretionary effort. The things that you do that you didn't actually get paid to do, right? That's where organizations make their money, is tapping that level of discretionary effort that the employees don't have to give you, but they want to give you. When you create this environment, people get to work like a dog. And it doesn't cost you anything. In fact, in many cases, you can pay less. But you can pay less and get higher performance because you're creating that learning environment. There's a certain floor that you can't go below. But there's huge outcomes. And ultimately, it results in better value, more money. Everybody winds up with more in their pockets at the end of the day, right? So this is literally, this is do or die. This is survival for organizations in a competitive world. And the days when you could rely on process and technology to drive performance. I mean, you can still get performance gains by adding technology, but the secret to getting those gains is the way you manage and grow your human capital. It's not the technology side. There's lots of examples of companies that have invested in technology and never gotten anywhere with it because they haven't invested in the people side of the business. People first, technology second. I mentioned a book, Talent Wins, by the guys over at the folks at McKinsey. And they suggest what they refer to as this holy triumvirate at the top of an organization. The CEO, the CFO, who handles your financial capital, and the Chief of Human Resources, who's in charge of your talent. And that the strategy of the organization and the performance goals of the organization and everything is driven by HR. And they should have that role at the top of the organization, not buried down here doing pay and benefits, but focused on the strategic imperative for talent. Because that's what drives strategy, that's what drives performance, that's what drives success. You can get money anywhere. Financial capital is easy to get. Human capital is rare, and it's becoming rarer. So organizations that can harness that and focus on this competency will be the ones that are still around when everybody else has gone broke. It's just that simple. Are there any questions on this? Because now it's going to be your turn. Okay? It's your turn. Okay. On your desks, you should have a sheet that talks, it's got a bunch of scribblies on it, or room to scribble. What I want you to do is work in teams. Let me see here. I'll find the one.
It's these three.
There's one. There we go. This one. Okay. Everybody see? Looks like this. All right. Within your groups, and we got people from that are like clusters around specific organizations. Yay. That's actually cool, because sometimes we wind up with 20 people and they're all from different companies and it really gets tedious. But if you're all from the same organizations, this actually is cool. Cluster together where you can with folks from your own company or own organization and walk your way through this. Step one is having that deep conversation internally around what really matters. What are the real values of the organization? Okay. If you have trouble with that, that's a hint that you need to bring your CEO in here and have a chat. Okay. But figure out what are the values, what matters, and how does that impact the mission of the organization? Why do we come to work at all? Then how do you take those values and turn them into behaviors that you want to see every single day throughout the organization? That's step two. Okay? How does your organization embody those values in the way it behaves with its customers and internally amongst ourselves? That's step two. Write that down. Then you go to step three. Okay? What are the underlying competencies, behavioral and technical, that allow people to act that way in the service of your customers? It's not an easy thing. Think about them. Write them down. Those are your core competencies. Those are the critical things you should be hiring for, because you can teach people the rest. Okay? And then I want you to do a job description for your role in the company based on those values and behavioral statements, which is the last piece. And we've given you an example to do that.
So when you go through all of that, so how do you make it specific to a certain job? Because I mean, if you're looking at the values of the organization and you're developing your competencies based on the values of the organization, how then do you make it specific to a payroll person?
Okay.
Like how?
That's why the last step, the last step is to do it for your job. So I'm assuming you understand what the technical skill sets are that you require in your job. Okay, so when you need to figure out, okay, we want to see these behavioral pieces. We want these core competencies that are expressed throughout the organization. And then you'll have others that are either role-specific, department-specific, or function-specific, okay? And to figure out what they are, that's where you need the interaction within, the people that actually do this in the organization. So managers and ideally the folks who are hands-on doing this, which is why at the end, the job description is for you, your role, because I'm assuming you understand your role probably better than you understand other roles within the organization. So you can ask yourself, because you know, if you were doing this for, I don't know, the widget vendors, assuming you have widget vendors, you would go and talk to whoever it is who's bending widgets, and the people that manage the people that bend the widgets, and find out what the technical and other behavioral competencies are very specific to those roles, right? Because you want a certain kind of person, and then you want them with the right technical skill sets to fit into a role. Okay, does that make sense? How's that for hard on a Wednesday? Okay. What I want you to do, you can spend literally days, weeks doing this. Don't. because we all want to get out of here and we've got a plane to catch. But take 15, 20 minutes, really, really focus. It's the Pareto principle and Parkinson's law. Everybody know what Parkinson's law is? Parkinson's law says work will expand to fill whatever time you allow for it. So if you give yourself a week, you'll take 2. So I'm giving you 15 minutes. Focus. All right? Doesn't have to be perfect, but an imperfect execution beats perfect inaction every time. All right. Tools down. How hard is that exercise? Good. It's supposed to be. Now imagine doing that for every position in your organization. That's why it doesn't happen, okay? Because it's hard. It has to be something that is done through the organization and done collectively. Like ultimately, I'm going to guarantee if you're in HR, this will wind up on your desk. Go do this for the organization. HR can't inflict this on the organization. HR can help, but it really has to come from the organization, particularly when you get down to those technical skill sets, because only they know what they are. And the values piece has to come from the leadership of the organization. It just does, right? That's why they're there. And it's really hard, and you won't get it right the first time, probably not the second, third, or fifth time either, because it's an iterative process and it's an evolving process, and it's constantly shifting and changing. I want people to go through that exercise and feel how painful it is on purpose, right? It's supposed to be. What I want you to do now, I'll kind of fling it open to the room, is walk me through what you came up with at the for some of this stuff, by group, by table, because it'll be interesting. At the core values, I'm going to make a prediction. A lot of the core values and core competencies are going to be the same between organizations that are different. Just for fun. You guys want to start? I'm going to pick
Sure.
on you. Okay.
I actually cheated a bit and I looked up Lakeland College's values on Google.
Dr. Google.
Dr. Google. So our values are learner success, integrity, respect, community excellence, and innovation is the college's values. And so, so are you talking? Do you just want us to kind of review step
Just kind
one?
of a high-level overview of what you've done, and how does that manifest itself day to day?
Well, what we tried to do is we were looking then at sort of one specific role, if you want to call it. And so when we looked at all of those values that the college had, we looked at things like integrity. And then we talked about honesty, fairness, knowledgeable. We talked about respect. And basically respect was just how to treat one another. Community was providing a supporting atmosphere. Is that what you had written down? Okay. Excellent was knowledgeable, up to date. I had staying up to date twice. And innovation was new ideas, creative, thinking outside the box. So that was just some of the stuff that we came up with for step number 2. Then we got to number 3, and we kind of struggled a bit in coming up with behaviors and technical skills that kind of went with that, because a lot of them are behavioral. And so we talked about an active mentorship that piece being in there, getting along with people, genuine, analytical, resourceful, open-minded, actions. And then we were trying to figure out, okay, how do you put competencies of an individual? How do you get somebody who, how do you know if they're genuine or analytical or resourceful or open-minded? So we're like, okay, we're done. So like you said, it's like, we're not going to get it the first go round.
Probably
so,
not. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea is that those core values of the organization, if I am going to act or do something, even applying my technical skill, if I'm an instructor at the school, I instruct. That's my skill set. And I probably have something I know about, which is separate. And then I have to know how to teach that to somebody. But there's a way I behave while instructing that reflects those values. And it's different if I don't have those values, if I don't embody those competencies. And you think about it. It's like leadership. Everybody knows what it is when it's not there, but try and define it, right? Everybody will recognize when it's missing. And everybody will recognize it, but trying to quantify why this, it's hard, but it's critical. It really is critical. And it's supposed to be a tough exercise. So that's, anybody else?
Good job.
Go ahead. All right.
So
So you got a different set of values than these
no,
guys?
no, we looked it up on the website as well. Yes. So just because it's the same, we had the same things with the leadership or with the learning and innovation and stuff. So I just wanted to say just add to what they said instead of resaying it all. We were talking about lifelong learning. So we were talking about, they always provide training. We have lynda.com, D2L, and all of those things are different programs in which we have stuff we can do. We also thought it also touched on our students themselves, how we cater to such diverse, different age groups, different, nationalities and all of that. And we're always looking, and you can see the college in different groups and within the college and how we're trying to enhance the student experience. So that's kind of the end goal. For lots. So even myself in HR, I think, I'm there to provide, to hire excellent people for our students. And, that's kind of one of my things. Okay. Innovation, we were talking about, we feel encouraged and supported by leadership through, what they say and what they do to us and that sort of thing. And like them, integrity, respect, community was a little harder. So community, we were talking about social events that we put on. We talked about communication from leadership. I have on here again. There's lots of transparency. So even though I'm in HR or even though I'm a caretaker, they send out like how many students are enrolled, so we can see that, look at us, we're increasing enrollment and that sort of thing. So I really enjoy that transparency. And they do Lakeland Link, and all of these other kind of communication tools. Mm-hmm. So it really builds a relationship, I find.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I got time for more. You guys want to go?
A little bit of what I can do here. Our core values start with diversity, empowerment, teamwork, open communication, customer satisfaction, integrity, mutual respect and caring, and delivered results. And that's our 8 core values. How do we display these through every day? It's pretty well through all interactions. We teach them, we train them, we look for them, we practice them. Not really sure how to answer that one. So number 3, just some of our competencies like that we kind of practice every day is risk-taking, resilience, paradoxical, neoliberal thinking, deep listening and inquiry, drive for results, and exceptional customer experience. After that, I don't have nothing.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay. Who wants to take a stab next? Just throw it out there. Anybody? Nobody? So I get to pick?
Pick.
Give me that thing. I'll just throw it at somebody. Well, here you guys go for it.
All right. Thank you. So our core values, we have accountability, fun, people matter, innovation, stability, and customer focus. So I think the ones that are most important to our company would be the stability and customer focus right now. I think we're lacking in the people matter one, which is a big issue because, like we discussed, people are pretty important. Some of the things that we do have is flexibility in working hours, reward and recognition programs that have kind of petered off with the downturn. We're more so in survival mode. And I think the company likes to, they're proud that they're debt-free and have money in the bank, which is good for them, but I don't think the people so much are too thrilled about that. And that's about as far as we got.
Okay. One more. Oh, come on.
I didn't get anything to number 3, so I feel my.
How about you guys? How about you guys?
I struggled quite a bit with this one. So, I wouldn't feel too confident
Okay.
unless Karen wants to take it.
So here's the question. We noticed in terms of core values there's a thread that seems to connect all these organizations, all the different organizations.
I'm not even with their organization.
Okay. The other thing I thought was interesting is that some people had to go and Google to find out what the values of their organization were.
Sure we got.
Okay. So it's one of the cool things about values and vision, mission in organizations. I always say if you can't fit it on a t-shirt, it's too complex. No one will care. And you know, there's a buddy of mine runs a fairly large consulting company right across Canada, and you can ask anybody in that organization what the core values are, and it's an eat what you kill environment, like most professional services organization, right? So if you're a consultant, you're expected to go and land jobs, right? You don't land jobs, you don't get paid. It's just the way it is, right? You eat what you kill. But the way they run that place, which should be a really toxic environment, right? But it's not. And you can ask anybody from the most junior associate to the managing partners, what are the core values? And they'll tell you, it's simple. Do great work, have a lot of fun, and make a lot of money. And the only way you get to make a lot of money is by doing great work and having a lot of fun, right? And it's that simple. And you can see it everywhere in the organization, which is really interesting. No one keeps secrets. No one says, I know how to do this and I'm not going to tell you because, no, there's this constant sharing. There's no IP rules. No one owns intellectual property. They don't have non-competes if anybody leaves the firm. Go ahead, and we wish you all the best in whatever you wind up doing. And take your clients with you, that's fine. We'll get more, right? It's a really, really interesting, very collegial environment in a cutthroat business that eats its young, traditionally, right? Like the whole way in consulting, law, those kinds of businesses, the whole way you grow, or the ethos of those companies, right, is hire them young and smart and then spend the next 5 years trying to kill them. And if they survive, make them partners. And then they can do it to the next generation. That's the way those businesses operate and have always operated. It has all of the ingredients for a really, really, really toxic work culture. And yet, these guys, Western Management Consulting, aren't like that at all. It's a fun place to go to work. People go, they thrive, it's really, really neat. So, and it's because of that simple understanding of what the values are. It starts there. I mean, there's more to it than that, but it really starts with that understanding of the values. And people who don't live those values get tossed. And they'll get tossed on that before they get tossed on the performance of the consulting work they do. Right? It really does matter. Okay? The last thing I want you to do, this is a homework assignment. You didn't know you were getting homework, did you? It's an optional homework assignment. I can't track you down. But the last page is, I want you to try to develop a competency-based job description for yourself using that template, using the value statements, using the competencies that you created coming out of this. Then try and go to the last stage, which is writing that job description, competency-based job description. And I invite you, as Chris said, it's free consulting, okay? I invite you to send them to me. My email address is on the sheet. I've got cards here. I will review them and I will provide commentary back. And it won't cost you a nickel and it'll be worth whatever you paid for it, okay? Because you will only learn how to do this by doing it. Okay? Please make the effort and show me what you've got. Right? So it's an open offer. I will look at these, I will provide commentary, and I will help you improve them. Okay? So that's it. That's the end of my free offers. Any questions? Yep.
So once the competencies have been developed, okay? And so those competencies are going to tie back to your recruitment.
Yep.
You're going to be recruiting for somebody who has whatever they have.
Mm-hmm.
So how then, or what's the process? And maybe I have to go to another course. What's the process then for determining that within an individual? So, like your interview questions, how do you develop that around your competency?
There's a short answer and there's a long answer. Which one would you like? The short answer is it depends. No, and because how you measure those competencies depends on what the competencies are, right? So in a very technical role, it's easier to define what the competencies are. The way most of the other stuff, the critical thinking stuff, the ability to work with other people stuff, that comes from direct observation, which is why I love what NextJump does, where they do those Super Saturdays and watch how people interact with each other, or the way they did it in Albuquerque, where they just throw the basketball out and say, have at, let's find out who the leaders are. So those kinds of interactions, ideally, you put people through your interviewing process, through your hiring process, in ways that you can observe them being themselves. Okay? Maybe that means, here's an idea. Maybe that means putting them all together in a room before they're interviewed, and just just watching what happens, and seeing how they interact with each other, if those skills are critical to the role. Everybody remembers Men in Black, and they're all sitting there trying to do the test, and they're all, and Will Smith gets up, walks across the room, and drags the coffee table over so that he can, right? And everybody's like, no, you can't do that. We were given a chair to sit in. But the critical skill set, the critical competency is the ability to think outside the box, go, hey, I got to do something about this, innovate, and solve the problem. That's what they needed, right? I don't know if they had planned to find that out through that process, but they sure found out, right? So there are ways that you can test for these things through interviewing, through the way that people interact. It takes skills on the behalf of the hiring managers and the HR people to identify this stuff and understand when people are faking it, right? And then make sure that from day one, assuming they get through whatever hoops you can make them jump through in the hiring process, that they are indoctrinated and observed and grown through that orientation process so you can weed them out quick if they don't really belong. Okay. I don't know if that answers the question, but you have to think. And if you're hiring for a particular skill, we had this conversation with some folks the other week from one of the tech companies down in Calgary, and they said, well, we really need this skill. So how do you test that? How do you verify that a candidate has that skill? Well, if they've got a, degree in such and such. Yeah, right? No, do what Google does. Have a hackathon. Invite all your candidates that have the on-paper qualifications and have them code a bunch of crap for you and see what happens and hire whoever wins. Now you have a practical test. Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, you make judgments based on 1 hour interview.
Yep. Yeah, make hay slowly because the cost of doing it wrong is high. Yeah. 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 And that's, you have to, literally, you have to think about this, right? It has to be on purpose. And it's iterative because you'll make mistakes. Learn from the mistakes. When you hire someone and it turns out that they are a dud, does anybody go back and look at what the process was for hiring them and figure out why we hired a dud? That's a reflection of the company's real values, right? Whatever it says on the wall. But when someone makes a mistake, what happens? Right? Well, yeah, if this kind of stuff starts going on, and now you know what the values really are around here. Okay? But yeah, if you hire the wrong person, following your process, well, is it the process? Is it the competencies of the people who were doing the interviews? Could be. Right? But again, I mean, you have to learn. You have to grow these skill sets, and finding the right people is a skill. That's a core competency of the business. Oh yeah. Well, as I said, it was what Mike, the guy. Yeah, they get a lot of practice at interviewing, and they do really well in it. Right. And the more interviews you go to, and I mean, anybody who's gone with a hiring agency or whatever, they get coached on what to say and how to say it, and they know the right answers to all the behavioral questions. Same as you can find the keywords to get you through the screens, and you can look them up, Dr. Google, right? Maybe. Right? Maybe. Some of them are just scared to death because they're not actually qualified. But usually if they get to that stage, they're okay. That's not actually that unusual, right? What if you're, like my wife's a registered nurse. And we were living in northern Quebec, where everybody who was there had been there for a long, and there were no jobs. It's about the only place I've ever been in the whole planet where there was no shortage of nurses. So she didn't go back to work when we moved up there. So she had a gap in her resume of like 8.5 years, almost 10 years. Not because she wasn't a competent nurse. So those are gaps. Oh, okay. Well, if I was to try and do a job interview, it would be hilarious. It would be on every blooper reel on the internet. It would like YouTube fail all over it. Yeah. No. And people who are back in the job market because the company they were in went broke and haven't interviewed for a job in forever and probably haven't updated their qualifications since they got the job in the first place. Doesn't mean they don't have skills. They've acquired skills, on the job by osmosis, sometimes really, really, really highly technical skills, but they've got no way of documenting it. They've got no way of proving it. Those people don't get jobs. They should, but we don't have a way. This is a whole different problem, but because we don't have a way of quantifying competency other than pieces of paper, and they're useless. So, not to depress everybody before we get out of here, but they resumes, like I said, on a 0 to 1, where 0 is useless and 1 is perfect, 0.1. Actually hiring someone who did the same job at a different company is still only a 50-50 shot. Because it's a different environment, it's a different manager, it's a different work context, even if it's the same job. It's still only a 50-50. The technical skills may be there, but they may not be the right fit. They may not fit into the culture here. So if you combine proper, rigorous testing, pre-employment testing, with demonstrations of skill and proper behavioral interviewing, not, sell me this paperclip kind of crap, but doing it well, and it's a hard thing to do well. You can increase the chances of a good hire to about 70%. It's still not perfect, right? But it's closer. And the highest, as I said earlier, the highest percentage odds of getting the best employee are people that are brought in and referred from your existing employees, particularly in high-risk environments, because they won't work with an idiot. They won't work with an idiot. Like if I work in a job that's risky, I don't want to work with someone who's not competent and that I can't work with. So if I'm going to suggest you bring someone in, if you're going to work with me, he better know what he's doing in a high-risk environment, and I better be able to skill set and the fit is always best with internal referrals. And you don't have to post the job, which saves you even more money. Mm-hmm. Poaching.
Works better.
Mm-hmm.
Because in sales, they're not side by side, so it doesn't happen. We're not out there looking for jobs.
Yeah. Mm. Maybe. Yeah. So on that happy note, I'm getting the hook here. Any more quick questions? 1 minute. All right. Thank you. Send me your descriptions.